end of it, geopolitics is all defined by economy. You
right?
can be a strong country, as Pakistan calls itself, but it has no economy. So geopolitically, it's particularly weak. Today, how do you see the stand of India with regards global geopolitics is concerned, and regional today? I guess India is, I think, climbed over that particular ladder, but I'd expect
Yes,
your comments on that as well.
yes. Look.
Global
Nobody,
geopolitics, where
nobody
do we stand?
equates India. Nobody equates India with Pakistan any longer. That
Any
equivalence
longer?
has long been broken. Okay. Now the question is the following: when it comes to China, there is no doubt that China, compared to India, is an economic giant. But where India scores over China is the fact that China is fast turning into a mercantilist power. That
Yeah.
means it exports in such a manner that it exports to hurt others. If your exports were matched by your imports, nobody would complain. But that's not what China does. China will export, but it will ensure it does not import. Let me give you an example. Vis-a-vis India, okay, China is obviously a low-cost economy, a more competitive economy where India is concerned, and as a result of which it will have a trade surplus. But there are areas, for example, pharmaceuticals, especially cancer drugs, etc., where India has an advantage. Does China allow Chinese to import Indian drugs?
Nope.
They do not. Ironically, there is a Chinese film, about a family which is fighting cancer, and it is a happy ending because they are able to get drugs illegally from India. I forget the name of the film. And yet you have the Chinese authorities foolishly ensuring that Chinese India is not able to export goods to China. By the way, how much pharmaceuticals could you export anyway? They have a 90 billion to $100 billion trade surplus with us. It won't hurt them. It's this mercantilist policy that they've ingrained, that they practice with the rest of the world and India, which is ensuring that the Chinese clout in the rest of the world is not commensurate with its economic clout. Because whatever they do now, they are seen as an economy which basically sucks the lifeblood of the country where they invest. For example, after the initial enthusiasm, euphoria about this, Belt and Roads initiative, that's gone out. Okay. So Belt and Roads, unfortunately, was not an initiative to improve connectivity. It was ultimately an exercise to ensure that Chinese excess capacity could be fully utilized by exporting to the rest of the world. You would install roads, railways, etc., and saddle them with debt. That was the problem. Those countries which are recipients of this particular so-called largesse are now figuring out that this is not a gift, it's a millstone around their neck. And that is why the Chinese, in a sense, have blotted their copybooks. People will not openly talk against China, but what it has done, it has raised India's profile, because India is not seen to be a predatory economic power. Now, that's one part. What's the positive part? The positive part is India has always believed in multilateralism. You know, in spite of being hurt ourselves, we talk about setting up a system which is primarily rules based and everybody plays by the rules. Number one. Number two, yes, given the fact that we are at a certain stage of our development, we need certain concessions vis-a-vis health and so on and so forth. And that strikes a resonance, that is a resonance with a lot of the global south. So when we are saying, look, you can't be that gung-ho on intellectual property rights where medicine is concerned, that strikes a chord in many poor countries, because, even if you get a small disease like diarrhea, an illness like diarrhea in an African country, given the price of anti-diarrheal drugs, you could actually die.
Yeah.
So these things become extremely important, and the fact that India basically speaks for it gives India a lot of salience in these particular countries. And of course, let's not be also be realistic about it. We are also seen as a country that can be played off against China. Okay, and there is a lot of dishonesty in this, that
Yes.
European countries trade with China. They give concessions to China. Their businessmen basically invest in China, procure in China what they could have procured in India, yet choose not to do so. And yet, Western politicians expect that when, push comes to shove, India can be put forward to do the shoving. And
Exactly.
luckily, India has not fallen for it. You see, even when we are part of the Quad, we make it a point to tell the rest of the world that the Quad is not anti anybody, that it has a multi pronged agenda. Very clever of us.
Indeed. I mean, I must say, sir, I wanted to ask you another question, but when you rounded this up, one point that you made, I must say, has not been condoned by a lot of people around the world. And I listen to a lot of China dialogues. I think my channel is predominantly about China. You said that China builds up its exports and ensures that it has a profitable or a favorable trade balance against
Hmm.
any country, and it does not let you export to it.
Yes.
So that tells you that this is a predatory practice to begin with. Chinese trade itself is predatory in nature. So it's not, they're not trading to do business. They are trading to actually build a certain geopolitical edge over you. And that is a
No.
very interesting point.
Okay. I believe China's predatory trade practices stem from an internal contradiction. You see, why doesn't China import more? Because unlike Japan in the 1950s and 60s, which saw income doubling policies, so you increased domestic income, you increased domestic disposable income, as a result of which domestic audiences or domestic population consumed more, and more
Yep.
you consume, the more you import. China actually has not done that. China has, it calls itself a communist country, but if you look at income inequality has China has worsened, and they have basically let it worsen. So there may or may not be an iron rice bowl which guarantees a minimum to everybody, but the so income doubling plans which you expected to see after some time, in a sense, have not occurred. Now, given the fact that they need to stoke domestic demand, you could stoke domestic demand by income transfer policies or by government expenditures that basically boost infrastructure. Now, given a level of economic activity, how much infrastructure can you have? Number one. So what do? You try to push your exports. And until the Chinese sort that domestic problem out, start transferring incomes to their own citizenry, enabling them to purchase more, buy more, you're going to have this particular problem. They will require a vent for surplus, the rest of to stoke domestic demand, and they will keep on exporting to the rest of the world. They will, this is basically called beggar thy neighbor, and they will continue with these beggar thy neighbors because they cannot solve this domestic problem on their own.
So, although this discussion is about India, but I'd like to ask you a follow up on this because, as an economist, I think you'll be able to give a very precise answer. You're talking about increasing the salaries of Chinese people so that they could spend more
Not,
within China.
not salary. You see, the question is the following: not just salaries. It's basically an income transfer plan. See,
Absolutely.
what has happened is, in the West, what happened? You had powerful trade unions, which
Hmm.
Galbraith used to call, countervailing power.
Hmm.
These trade unions pushed up wages. And when they pushed up wages, domestic demand also rose. It also forced the West to vacate low technology goods and go on to higher technology goods.
Indeed.
Okay. And now the question where the Chinese is concerned, I thought it would have happened naturally because their labor supplies are shrinking. Because of the one child
Child
policy
policy.
norm, the number of people retiring is much, much more than the number of people entering the labor force. I had expected their wages to rise. Those wages have risen, but not by much. Not by much. These wages will have to rise very, very fast. You see, now, true, if the wages rise, the Chinese will have to vacate the low technology areas pretty fast, which in any case are now being slowly but surely taken over by Bangladesh and Vietnam.
Yes.
Okay. But the climb of the technology ladder, in a sense, for China, I don't think has been as fast as it should be. How the Chinese solve that particular problem, I don't know. The Chinese haven't solved it yet.
As a matter of fact, as you give more money to people, your cost of labor goes up, which takes the
True.
entire Chinese advantage out the window.
Yes and no. This would have been 20 years ago. But then
So,
today, the question is the following here. You know, you cannot keep exporting the same low technology stuff year after year after year.
yeah,
You have to climb the technology ladder.
I,
And when you climb the technology ladder, you
yeah.
get better prices for your products. They are able to pay labor more. When will China start doing that? And secondly, you know, the other thing the Chinese could do is basically transfer income. You basically give income, you know, dole out income, basic minimum income, whatever. The Chinese, in a sense, have not done that. So, how do you increase the disposable income of your people so that instead of being forced to export, you have a domestic consumption that basically ensures that you have a high growth rate? The Chinese aren't doing that.